Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you had a good week. This is Richard Sachs, as we're live now, and this is Lost Arts Radio's Saturday, and it's October 19th. I hope everything's going well for you. I was just kind of slowly calming down a little bit. We've been racing to get ready for the show, and the last few days it's just been so much intense insanity in the world, and wondering what to focus on, because this is not any kind of even attempt to be a comprehensive news show. It's just looking at things that we can learn something from and are worth focusing on, and some unusual points of view on everything. And I was watching, especially we're sitting here in the U.S. and the president, whom there's this massive campaign now to get rid of him, which really started before the day that he got elected. It's really amazing, because the more he does positive things, and I've told you before, I have massive complaints about things that he needs to do better or has done wrong or not done, but whenever he does something positive, that's when the campaigns to destroy him really get intense. And there's been a lot of confusion about the deal that was just made in Syria with the Kurds and with Turkey and Erdogan in that country, but from what I can tell from really digging into it, it's an amazingly win-win-win situation for all sides, as much as possible in that environment of constant fighting and killing, and which started long before the U.S. started interfering with it. And it looks like it's going to facilitate the withdrawal of more U.S. troops, which was the promise that the president made when he was campaigning, and now he's keeping it, or attempting to keep it. And both parties in the U.S., both of our corrupt political organizations here called, I think they call them Republicans and Democrats, right? You've heard of them. And they're all against him, trying to keep his promise. And it's amazing. And so he's been doing that. And China, the situation with the Chinese government, which is a really ruthless dictatorship over there, and in many ways worse than what's going on anywhere else right now, and at least on a bigger scale. And it looks like something has been worked out there now that the representatives of the Chinese government are coming out and saying they're happy with, and it could be the end of the at least this part of the trade dispute between the U.S. and China, which is a huge accomplishment. If it gets finalized, it's still in the early stages. And because of that, president's also being viciously attacked for any possible reason, whether it makes any sense or not. And it just made me look, what's a theme for the week? And I think it's that there's massive amounts of insanity still spreading across a lot of the world, and certainly here in America. And it's being orchestrated by the major criminal media that we've got here, which is really amazing to watch. And certainly the universities and a lot of non-governmental organizations and the United Nations and the EU and all of these groups are promoting the most insanity and conflict and violence and hatred and fear under everything else. And they're promoting those things in the name of fighting the things they're promoting. And that obviously wouldn't go anywhere, except for the fact that the population, big parts of it, have been so successfully dumbed down and hypnotized that we actually fall for that kind of stuff, which is incredible. And you see people hating each other in the name of fighting hate, and with groups that we have now in the U.S. running around the streets in the cities, just beating up anybody they can find in the name of fighting fascism, I think it is, and exposing that the opposing major party is evil. So to do that, they commit all kinds of crimes, and it's usually in collusion with corrupt elements in the police in the city they're doing it in. So the police let them do it, and it's very strange. So not everybody is equally affected by the insanity, and it's obviously not working on the whole population very well right now, which must be very frustrating to our rulers. And I'm sorry it's so stressful for them, I know. But a lot of it, I think, when you try to understand the mass insanity that's going on in the cities and here, and also to some extent in what used to be Europe and also in the UK and other parts of the world, I would say that it's likely that we could attribute a lot of it to what's being used for frequency weapons against the population. And as I've mentioned before, whistleblowers have come out and acknowledged that they worked inside these so-called private security companies, and they weren't private security. They were R&D, I think, on excuse me, on using frequency weapons that were developed before World War II, that Barry Trower and others have talked about. But at that time, they were used mostly on individuals trying to get spies to kill people or commit suicide or go crazy in various ways, and they were quite successful. And by the 40s, the 1940s, these weapons were advanced enough so that they could control thought patterns, but they weren't that great on controlling huge numbers of people all at once. And I think that's what these whistleblowers coming out of the fake private security companies were trying to say. And apparently government agreed to that, because the whistleblower that I'm thinking of in particular was just totally deleted from the scene right away. Everything he had ever written or posted or in videos or things he had written, those were all destroyed and deleted like they'd never existed. And that usually means there's something valuable and true in there. Is why would they waste the time going after it if it was not true? And so now what it seems to be is these weapons aren't perfected, but they can affect a lot more people at once, and especially in a dense urban environment. You see these crowds running around, many of them paid, of course, by private organizations and people like that, but they're just going around wildly protesting, and they're not too clear on exactly what they're against, but they're really against it. And they'll beat you up just if you're available as an excuse. So my question was, at this time in this degenerative pattern in society, what could still be done, to turn it around? Because the direction it's going, at least those parts of it, don't bode really extremely well for the future. It's amazing the president in the U.S. is still alive, and anybody speaking anything that's true is definitely putting themselves in conscious danger. So what struck me about this question of what could be done about it to change it, I guess it brought up this whole other area that we talk about in Planetary Healing Club a lot, which is health. Not health going on 10 different medical drugs and getting totally addicted and destroying your brain and your body, not that kind of health, but the real health that is in harmony with nature. In Planetary Healing Club, we talk about a lot of that stuff because I've spent many decades just investigating that and experimentally researching it, trying it on my own body and sharing information with others. And it's generally pretty dangerous information to share, because a lot of doctors have disappeared in the U.S. and other places in the last 3 years or so, maybe a little more. And by disappeared, I mean died, and they, officially committed suicide and were not investigated and ruled suicide immediately after they were killed. It was a convenient setup. And so we talk about what they were trying to share, and much, much more, because most of the time they were only on the edges of discoveries that were still so powerful that we can't even mention most of them by name because we get shut down right away with the new censorship environment that we've got. So I was thinking about what about, where does health fit into this whole thing? And not just physical, but mental. And, how could we use that to start turning things around? And you notice, if you're observant at all, that the population, especially in the so-called advanced countries like the US and the UK and most countries in Europe and things like that, everybody's sick, or almost everybody's sick, except they don't really recognize they're sick because it's so common. It's the new normal. I just did a video on that you may see out pretty soon about the difference between common and normal, and what you see all around yourself. It's not just people getting used to it. The medical industry starts calling that normal and saying, yes, by this certain age, your hormones start getting all messed up and you lose a certain percentage of your muscle mass, and your mind slows down, or your brain slows down, doesn't work as well, and your joints stop working, and don't move too much because you'll probably hurt yourself. And I mean, that becomes the new normal. And if we're still a little bit conscious or have any common sense left, we'd wait a minute. There's a lot wrong with that picture. That's not normal. That's literally sick. But sick has become normal because the kind of healthcare we have is destroying health, just like the kind of education we have is destroying the ability to think and reason and observe, and common sense is definitely being targeted. So almost everybody ends up struggling with some kind of health problem, and are victims of the current highly advanced, cutting-edge science and medicine. And it's not just us, it's destroying the environment as well. And the environment is not just a wacko progressive term, it's real. For all of you people that identify yourselves as conservative out there, I'd highly recommend trying to break free of the two labels, liberal and conservative, because if either one were real, you could take your choice and they'd be fine, because liberal is supposed to relate to liberty, right? And having the freedom to live however you want to live, as long as you don't go out and infringe on the rights of anybody else. So that kind of liberal, that's great. That's like an ideal way to have it. That's the way that the founders of America, even if they didn't totally live up to it, this beautiful ideal that they wrote down as the founding documents of the United States was basically totally liberal. It was freedom, all based on freedom. Government was restricted. The federal government only had a few powers, and they were called the enumerated powers, and they were written down in a list. And it specifically said you can't do anything but this if you're the government. And later on, it was totally ignored and corrupted. And they said, well, no problem. If we can't, for example, control education in the constitutional powers of the federal government, we'll just start an agency, a department of education. It doesn't have to be constitutional because it's an agency. Everybody knows that. And so it can totally control education, which they needed to do because of the deep state agenda that was existing long before the US was even thought of. So anyway, normal has become sick. And in the club meetings, we talk about what to do about that and how to reverse it naturally. But a normal person who's investigating that, if we're somewhat normal anymore, is comes up with a question: what did the real health teachers in times a long time ago teach people to do? And I know that the ancient people are supposed to be really superstitious and unscientific, and they didn't know anything compared to modern medicine and science now. In fact, I was taught, so I'm a pretty old person compared to some of you, and I remember in the 50s, the early 50s, and we were taught in elementary school. The people in our space program, and of course that was pretty early stage of the public space program anyway. And they said, well, now we have modern science and we know what's going on. We understand the world. We understand health and disease, all the cause and effect. We can cure everything. And, we're modern. But the people before 1950, they were all superstitious and they really low intelligence, and they didn't really know much of anything. pretty much like animals that they had no respect for, just running on the basis of instinct, just about. But what was really happening was the opposite. With the input of Bernays and all these other people that were working on propaganda of your own people, they were working on getting rid of common sense completely, which is pretty far gone at this point, and bringing in their goal of a centralized world tyranny, and then after that, the extermination agenda, which is in progress right now, beyond the concept of even most of the conspiracy people. But it's what's happening. And yet the wisdom of people in some of the really old times that aren't even recorded in our, well, they were probably recorded at the time, but most of us aren't aware of them now. They were, some of them were real health teachers and thousands of years ago and even longer. So we've been talking about those in the club meetings, and I've been looking at trying to adapt what they taught in practical ways to modern use now, current circumstances, and a much more toxic environment, stuff like that. But most of it I can't talk about publicly because I figured I'm more useful when I'm still in a physical body, and it's hard to maintain that if you get too openly public about that. But the current system, under the current system, people are just blindly falling into the programming about all of life, not just health, but everything. I mean, it's almost all the opposite of what we're told. And the world leaders that are promoting information that's not true, a lot of them don't know the depth of the fact that it's untrue, and they're brainwashed themselves. And if they do know it's not true, they think that they're doing something good by keeping the people unaware. But what would happen if we didn't fall for the programming? I mean, I know seems like a really unrealistic, imaginary image, but what if we didn't fall for it, and they couldn't get us to hate and destroy ourselves and everybody else? What if they couldn't get us to destroy the natural world and, our life support system? When you say the environment, a lot of people on one side of the political spectrum think that it's all just a hoax. They legitimately do think that. A lot of them that I've talked to, even leaders, political leaders and things, and it's more subtle than that. The whole climate change thing and the global warming thing and environmental emergency thing, it is being used as a hoax, absolute hoax, no question about it. The climate change thing, where they use little kids and they make them memorize the details of the disaster and then tell everybody else while they're crying. They're genuinely crying about it because they're terrified by their programmers. But it is a complete hoax for the purpose of getting us to give up rights and freedoms and national sovereignty and things like that, and gladly submit to global tyranny to save the world from the environmental emergencies. But at the same time, the real environmental emergencies are real, and they're really serious. And they, as I've said before, Rachel Carson was right, but she was understated, and the danger of the pesticides and all that, and that was before the GMOs made things even more ridiculous. So one of the things that I've often said that I have a complaint about, huge areas of ignorance of the current president in the U.S., is so far he's in support of absolutely toxic, suicidal agriculture, including and not limited to GMOs, pesticides, and all the rest. And in fact, that great deal that he just signed with, or is trying to sign with China, which is great in the intent and working out, getting out of a hostile, really dangerous situation for the world into something much better, because business partners who are both profiting from the agreement will not tend to want to destroy each other because they like the income, and it's just incredibly brilliant. But the farmers in the U.S. are going to be asked to increase the amount of grain and soybeans and things that they're producing, and I'm really glad for you farmers for that happening. I want you to be prosperous. But if you're producing GMOs, you're poisoning the Chinese people as well as the American people, and that's not really a brilliant plan unless you just want to help destroy everybody. GMOs are a real atrocity, and they should never have been allowed anywhere in the world. That's not legitimate free market capitalism producing something that kills people when they don't even know it and they think it's food. That's not okay, and it doesn't mean that you need, tyranny as the other option. It just means that in a legitimate free market capitalist society, you don't make money by doing things that murder everybody. That's not a good thing to do. So no system, even a great free market capitalist system that doesn't have government collusion with evil corporations and stuff like that, it doesn't work, even the best system, unless there's some consciousness in the people. And that's why, again, you get brought back to the key element where what's important is that the population needs to become conscious again. That not just make the country great again, but make the people conscious again. That's even more basic, because the greatness won't work if the people are out to lunch and totally hypnotized zombies. That doesn't make it work well. So we need to find some solutions for that, and if we're conscious enough, we're not going to have to fall for these things. And when rulers or other people behind the scenes are trying to do things that are really destructive, they won't get the people to go along with it. So it's much harder for them to actually put it into practice. The question is, how are we ever going to heal the world from its current situation, which is really serious? People on both sides of the spectrum have understandings of how different parts of it are urgent. On the so-called right side of the spectrum, some of them understand about the incredibly important issue of Agenda 21 and how pervasive it is. And Rosa Koire, who's not on the right side of the political spectrum, did a great presentation of this in a video that you can still get. I guess they don't figure it's a big threat because not too many people fully understand it, maybe, but it was called Behind the Green Mask by Rosa Koire, and her name is Koire. Really did a lot of great work, and less active now, I think, probably because she's been threatened. But the real question is, how can we break out of the trance and stop the destruction that's all over the place now, all around us, and while we're busy destroying ourselves and not even realizing it? And we are doing that while the rulers and the engineers of this whole plan just laugh, because they're part of the theme of their plan is not to have to do too much themselves, but just set things in motion and get us to destroy ourselves. And I didn't really complete that statement where I said, well, some people on the so-called right side, plus Rosa Koire and a few others, understand the danger of Agenda 21, and which is now Agenda 2030, after their New York meeting, and all the ideas of getting people off the rural areas and off the land and into dense cities where they can be totally surveilled and controlled by so-called smart cities, which are total atrocity. You never want to live in one of those places. In fact, you want to get out of the clutches of anything smart that you possibly can. And I know in the university work that I'm doing now, they're really pushing the smart idea, and they're just so proud they don't know what they're doing. They think it's really good because they're so educated. But the people above them who designed it, I mean, these are really smart marketing people. They thought, who's going to be against the word smart? I mean, smart is good, right? It's good for everything. And so they made the AI agenda and the Agenda 21 plans and all that, all based on smart technology, smart grids, smart meters, smart refrigerators, smart, eventually self-driving cars if they can get the deadly 5G set up everywhere. And not a really good vision of the future, but it needs the cooperation of the people that's us, is to kill ourselves, to destroy ourselves, ruin our lives, voluntarily turn ourselves into the smart cities and become prisoners there voluntarily. And so far, we're doing it. And it's somewhat understandable because they've got this thing called money that they use as leverage to make people do the things they want to do through this brilliant system, which is a total scam of the central banking systems that control every part of the world. And I've heard a recent lady calling into a major talk show was saying, yeah, well, one of the reasons Russia's being demonized is because they don't have a central bank. That's wrong. They've had a central bank for a long time. And it's just in the early 90s it became the current Bank of Russia, but it was there long before that in the Soviet system. And they are absolutely controlled by a central bank. The reason that Russia's been demonized is not because they lack that. It's because they were doing some good things that couldn't be allowed to spread, such as Putin saying that he wanted to become the world's #1 exporter of organic food. That, I mean, I wish that would sink into all the progressive protesters that hate Russia and the conventional Republicans that think Russia is the biggest threat to the world. The reason they were taught that that was true is because of these good things, and that Russia was supporting families and giving people land to grow organic farms on, and I mean, trying to get 5G out of the schools, wireless out of the schools, which, by the way, anybody that doesn't know about that, wireless technology is extremely hazardous. It's not risky, it's damaging. That's not the same as risk, because in risk, it implies that there's a chance that you might get hurt and a chance that you might not get hurt. And that's called risk. And they call things risky that are not risky, they're guaranteed damage. And one of the damaging technologies is the frequencies that they're using for Wi-Fi. 5G just makes it a lot worse. Getting those out of schools is really important. And Russia under Putin was actually working on that. So they had to be, demonized at all costs. And the question is whether the people can wake up from the trance, that's us that I'm talking about, and step back and think about what we're doing, hurting ourselves, hurting each other, following crazy ideas that are given to us by our so-called educational system and our media, which is trying to censor all the dissenting voices, all the private media that's telling the truth. They're all being censored right now. And by the way, it brings up in my mind to remind you that if we happen to disappear off whatever major platform you're still watching us on, go to lostartsradio.com and stay in touch with us there. Get on the mailing list. You can, I'll tell you later, you can write to your name and email address to info@lostartsradio.com. And Doug has even set up a text number that you can use. And I got to make sure that I get the right number before I tell you that. Because if I give you one number off, it's not going to work. But you can send your name and email address to info @lostartsradio.com and just ask to be put on the mailing list, and you would be. In case it gets really hard to find us, you can still be in touch. But we are on Brighteon.com, brighteon.com/channel/Lost Arts Radio. And Mike set that up at great expense and with a huge amount of work, and it's really developing now. Everybody should be helping Brighteon.com by watching movies there. You don't have to give them any money necessarily, just use it, start a channel, upload videos, watch videos, whatever you can do on Brighteon.com. They're going to start live streaming probably what I've heard is early next year, which will be really incredible. You can say whatever you want as long as it's, within the reason that you're not calling for violence or murdering somebody or something completely ridiculous like that. Otherwise, dissenting points of view will be welcome and supported there, which is super valuable. Anyway, what I was trying to get to, and our time is racing by again, I've got bullet points written down here on 12 pages of those, and I've gotten through 1.5 pages, so I don't like to talk at chipmunk speed too much. We'll just hit the high notes of the things that I can and maybe do more next week. But What I was getting at is that the insanity which has been programmed into us, the population, the question is, can we break that? And you can't break it in anyone else unless you break it in yourself first. And it reminds me, in the movie Avatar, if you saw that by any chance, it was a pretty neat movie. And I know a lot of the people are saying bad things about it that I've talked to, and so, about it. I don't know. I don't even understand the criticisms exactly. I thought it was a good movie. But in there's a scene that if you've seen it, you might remember, where Neytiri's mother, and you might remember her name, I don't, but she's walking around Jake, that one of the stars in the movie, and looking at him, and he's come out of the other side, which is trying to destroy the life support system of the native people there. And she's saying, well, we'll see if your insanity can be cured. You might remember that line. And that's the situation now. For each one of us, we're incredibly important, because if our insanity can be cured and we stop polarizing and just defending labels and going crazy for that, if we cure our own insanity, then the sanity is much stronger than the insanity, and it can spread. So really the question is, how do we do that, I think? And I guess for one thing, our brains are really trying to operate on fuel that goes into our blood, what you eat and drink, and if you're smoking something or taking poisonous chemicals that are called medicine, or whatever you're putting into your blood is also going to your brain, because I know this is a really deep concept, but your brain is actually part of your body, and the blood comes from the same place. And if it's blood full of toxins and it's missing vital nutrients and things like that, then the success of getting your brain clear enough to become unhypnotized is not great. And what I'm doing here is trying to tie together the importance of you as managing your own health, and the situation in the world where the rulers are pretty clear on what they want to do. Total centralized tyranny followed by extermination. And Mike has talked about that a lot. Disturbing to some people, but he's just being honest in what he's figuring out. And I would mostly agree with him, except that I don't think that it's just reduction. I don't think they're trying to save it for themselves. I think this is a suicide mission by the rulers, and they don't intend to need their physical bodies anymore. They'll be able to merge into some kind of cyberspace, and it's totally insane, but they actually do believe it. So we're in the middle with that understanding of a spiritual ceremonial sacrifice, except we're the sacrificial animal. So I don't think that's a very good plan. And if we want to clear our brains enough so that our minds can work and we can start not acquiescing to our own destruction, then we're going to have to do some things physically too. You can't have as good of a chance to become sane on junk food. And that's another big thing that I think the U.S. president is really missing. And he's trying to switch around his sources of food all the time so he doesn't get poisoned, which is one of the favorite things that the deep state agents do to irritating world leaders who don't go along with the plan. But where he's choosing his food from is all the fast food places. And so, it's a constant stream of poisonous chemicals, which doesn't do well in the long run for the person who's eating them. So we need to look at what each of us is doing in our regular everyday lifestyle details that we don't usually pay any attention to because we're so busy with the really important stuff, right? While we destroy ourselves. And we should realize that that's kind of important as well. And because if we don't fix our bodies and brains ourselves, and you don't go to the doctor for drugs to do that, you have to do it, by what you do every day. If you look around right now, the health of the people, especially in the advanced countries in the world, is really, really bad. And they're trying to tell us that that's normal. or that it's because we don't take enough drugs and get injected with enough toxic cocktails. And I'm not going to use the word for that, but you know what I'm talking about. And here in the U.S., most of the people are chronically sick, and even most of the kids, and they think it's normal, and it's true in a lot of countries. And if you're listening from the UK or countries in Europe or most places in the world now, you probably find that that's true to a great degree. And even the children have chronic diseases that are going to be lifelong. And we've had a lot of articles and archives and guests on that subject, doctors that have talked about it. Dr. Cousins has done a lot of shows on our channel on Lost Arts Radio that are really worth listening to if you get a chance. And yet, at the same time as the things we're doing to keep ourselves in a fog so that we can't break out of this stuff and we're going to stay walking around without being aware, there's so much money being spent on healthcare. It's just overwhelming, what does that really mean? It's going to the people that are promoting the toxic system of healthcare that has a monopoly in our country. And we're trained never to question the basic foundations of the current system. But the thing is about real science, which we're told to believe in, real science questions everything. Everything. The science, it's never settled. It questions its own beliefs and the latest proven things. It says, well, are you sure that's true? That's really honest science. And it's always historically been opposed by the scientific establishment that doesn't want competition of new ideas. But a long time ago, in fact, the medical system as we have it now used to refer to Hippocrates, this guy in Greece, a doctor in Greece around 400 BC, was referred to as the father of medicine. And it's believed that he wrote something called the Hippocratic Oath for doctors to take, so that, saying that they were getting into this profession for service to humanity. And there were certain things that they would observe. It's really hard to know exactly what was in the original version of that because I don't think there's anything surviving that we know of from his lifetime. And the earliest reference to it seems to be about the year 43 AD, which is about 400 years after he died. But it's pretty sure that originally there were some things that it was agreed around 43 AD or so that he was telling the doctors to do. The first of which was do no harm. At least don't hurt anybody. If you're not going to be able to cure them or get them in good shape, at least don't make them worse. Don't hurt them. Don't do anything bad. Don't poison the patient. You may have noticed that some of that's going on now, right? And I told you, they've been brilliant with words and phrases and things to change the way you think. And one of them is they invented this brilliant term called side effects. You may have heard of that when you've heard of side effects of a drug. Well, I've been looking at that for a long time, and as far as I can see, there is no such thing as a side effect. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. It just means different than the advertised effect. But it's the same. It's just as major of an effect as the main effect. It's just not what they want to use to promote it. It's, again, an example of how we're in this fog and we don't notice obvious things. And anyway, on with the things that Hippocrates said to do. He said keeping patients' information private had to be done. Not like today's system where they have this system called HIPAA, right, which is supposed to totally protect your privacy. And you run into it if you're a relative of a person in a hospital, say, and you're trying to call in and see how they're doing. They're very careful. They won't tell you very much at all, and it's really difficult to find out what you need to know. But they'll give it all to the government right away with no restriction. And they give it all into the electronic system. It can be accessed by people in government agencies and various doctors and medical personnel and bureaucrats and things like that. It's a terrible system, in my opinion. So, in my opinion, HIPAA is a total fraud, but that's not a common opinion. Usually in school, they teach you this is a tremendous advance and it is really protecting you. And now you don't have to worry about all those nasty private hackers, and your data is kept safe with the authorities and the government, which is a complete oxymoron, it seems to me. Anyway, Hippocrates also, we're looking at what Hippocrates told doctors to do so we could get an idea, excuse me, before the drug companies took over medicine, what we could do maybe that would apply now to help ourselves get better. And he said, don't charge patients more than they can afford, and if they're too poor to afford it, just do it for free. And in fact, this was happening in the earlier part of the 20th century. Ron Paul has talked about it and others that about 20% of the time, if I remember right, doctors were expected to just work for free for the people who needed it, for the poor people. And there was no government program required at all for that. So it didn't create debt to the central bank. It didn't do any of that stuff. They just were serving people, and they were making plenty of money as doctors on the other 80% of their work, and it worked great. Private charity is always vastly superior to anything government can do. And Hippocrates also said, honor real teachers, the people you've learned from. Don't kill unborn babies, which is popular today, or even after they're born, which is also just starting out to be popular now. Don't do that. It's not a good idea. It's not women's health freedom. It's not part of the mother's body. It's not some advanced, really, spiritual understanding. It's killing babies. So, you should not do it. And what else he said? Use food and natural modalities as medicine, not poisons. Really simple, common sense. And since then, the oath has been changed a lot of times in history, over and over again. They still call it the Hippocratic Oath, but they never checked with Hippocrates, and they use this excuse like he's not alive anymore. But they just change it, and most recently, they've been changing it so recently that the last one that I know of was in 2019. And it sounds like the change was really good. They said that the doctors have to also protect the environment which sustains us. And again, this is language that we wouldn't see through to the real meaning of it unless we get somewhat conscious, and our brain starts working right. And what I'm talking about is if you get your body healthy, which you can do, you don't need a team of experts to do that. You need your common sense back and start taking care of it, and pay attention to what things affect it, how, and when you do something that's not good for it and it makes it feel bad, pay attention and then don't do it anymore. It's really simple, but we have to get still and observant to do that. So protecting the environment, that sounds wonderful, and I totally agree with it. I've been a really intense environmental supporter since the early 60s. But the way they're using that now, like we said before, it's absolutely legitimate and it's an absolute hoax both at the same time. Also, they've added in protection of the community and the ecosystem. And the people who added that in did not have good intention. There's a strong influence from the WHO in the whole thing, which we've had Dr. Labo on, several times on the show. And she said, oh, yeah, we know the WHO, that's the World Homicide Organization, right? And they'd say, no, Rima, officially that's the World Health Organization. You just made a mistake. No, she said, no, that's the mistake. It's the World Homicide Organization. And she went on to give incredible detail of why that was the accurate name. But Margaret Chan, who was the Director General of the WHO from 2006 to 2017, she said in 2008 that the WHO is committed to doing everything it can to ensure all is done possible for protection of human health against climate change. And I'm not saying that climate is not under attack, it is. And I do believe in man-made climate change, but not the way they talk about it. The name of man-made climate change, the main part of it is called geoengineering, that not one of the people involved in the massive protests and promotion of stopping climate change, so far I haven't heard any of them to talk about geoengineering. No president or leaders of countries have talked about it. The US president has never mentioned it. I don't think he even understands it. He doesn't understand GMOs. And so when people like Margaret Chan say they're going to do everything possible to protect you against health damage from climate change, that sounds like a very, ominous threat to me. I think there could be modern political figures and activist groups who are really sincere in wanting to save everybody from climate change, but they don't realize that, the fear of climate change is being used to accomplish some very unfriendly things. And I've talked a lot about how that works, but only recently realized that it's been used even to change the Hippocratic Oath, so that now they're speaking for Hippocrates and saying even he was against climate change, and because they put it into the oath. And gradually, I would say that doctors and medical personnel have all gradually gotten away from the original wisdom of do no harm, because if they still believed in that or paid any attention to it, or the idea of using food and natural protocols as medicine, they couldn't do most of what they do. And again, using words, the most toxic stuff that they do that's really invasive is given this really beautiful name. It's called standard of care. And you have to follow standard of care, otherwise you can be eliminated as a doctor, and at least you lose your license if you're lucky and stay alive. But care, care sounds great, right? Everybody's in favor of care. So the standard of care is like the basic foundation of the best things you can do to the patient, theoretically, except that it's being used for things that are completely the opposite. And that change away from doing no harm to what's supposed to be modern science is great, except for one thing, that the results are absolutely terrible. And if you read books like the one by Dr. Humphreys, Dissolving Illusions, then you'll understand that World Health is a lot better than it was a few hundred years ago, but it's because of sanitation and hygiene, and in some places access to better food, but not from eating or injecting poisonous chemicals, which they say that's the reason that things are so much better, is because everybody's doing that. And if people are really sick, like they are in the US, and all the kids have, not all, but a lot of the kids have chronic diseases, it just means that you didn't get injected and swallow enough poison, and you have to do it more. And for your own good, you have to be forced to do it, like is happening in California, New York, and places like that, because you might not be smart enough to do it to yourself. And the reason of bringing up all this stuff is how to stop the insanity, that's spread all over the world, and help regain some of our normal consciousness, so we can't be fooled by what the rulers are trying to do to everybody and try to get us to do to ourselves. And it seemed to me that getting our normal health back, the real normal, where you kind of experience agelessness and you don't fall apart, your body doesn't stop working until you're ready to leave, that's normal. And it's just, we don't see it. There's no examples, so we forget about it. And if you have the understanding that that was at one time possible, then the question is, what did the ancient real health teachers know about how to do it, and how could you adapt it to now? How could you use it right now in your own life? Because it's essentially free. It's not like, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on some treatment that may kill you. And by the way, it says in the fine print that it can kill you. It says that in so many drugs and injections and things like that. So the question is, how did they help people get back to normal when they didn't even have access to all these poisonous chemicals and things that we call medicine? And how did they actually heal anybody and do no harm? So I've been trying to answer that question for the last, almost 55 years, and doing that kind of research and seeing what's possible. And the interesting problem that you come up with is if you find out, well, you're not really allowed to tell anybody because it would interfere with the, what the industry is doing right now. You can talk about it as a regular person if you make sure never to tell anybody what to do. Because if you tell somebody what to do, then that's illegal. And if you, there's a whole bunch of other things that are illegal. But at this point, just sharing information is not quite illegal yet. So we're trying to do that. And if you want to look at, the most of the best ancient records on this, what they used to do are lost. But we do have clues, ancient clues and modern clues of some of the really insightful health teachers that have picked up on these basic ideas that have not changed because the body still works on the same principles and the same natural laws. Examples that we've talked about before are the first volume of the Essene Gospel of Peace and Marcus Rothkran's really good book called Heal Yourself 101. This is stuff that you can use, and you realize you don't need Nobel Prizes and 10 PhDs or anything to take care of your own health and start making your brain work like it should, start reversing what's supposed to be normal aging, that most of which is not necessary. You just need to learn everything that you can and then learn how it applies to everyday things that you do. And by the way, both of these books that I just mentioned are free because you don't even have to, you can order them if you want, but which is maybe a good idea, but you don't have to spend any money. You can just type in Essene Gospel of Peace Volume 1 and then the letters PDF, and the same thing with Heal Yourself 101. And somebody's typed the whole thing into the internet. So for the moment, they're available free. And what they talk about, and I know we're almost out of time here, but what they talk about is basically, no matter what the diagnosis is, they weren't saying, well, here's 10,000 different diagnoses and each one has a different thing that you have to do, like the modern system says. They didn't do that at all. They said, here are the basic things to give the body the tools that it needs with its wisdom and consciousness and energy that comes direct from the source that we were created from. That's why we're still able to live here, is that connection is alive. And that is what heals anything that can be healed. No doctor, no natural doctor, no herbalist or homeopathy doctor, none of them heal anything. That the nature, that life current that flows through us is the only thing that does. So the real healers say, what can we do to support that, to encourage that to happen? And it's all based on detoxification and rebuilding the system after doing that. And simple stuff like sunlight, which the current system says is really bad for you, so you know it must be good. And sleep, getting enough sleep, which is critical. And exercise, which, by the way, will not make you strong without sleep. And a change in attitude of mind and things like that. And that approach works for both age and disease, and also maximizing immunity without anything toxic. And it works really well if you learn about it. That's why it's so critical to get that knowledge. And we talk about that in the Planetary Healing Club meetings. And I do a few private sessions, but I don't have time to do a lot of those. Anybody that really wants one intensely, you can email me, richard@lostartsradio.com, and I'll tell you what that's about. But if it's true that having bad health makes our brains foggy, and I know that it is, we're much more likely to stay frustrated and unhappy and fighting with each other and full of fear the more unhealthy we are, which is kind of interesting. I mean, even people that seem strong and active and they're running around, doing terrible things, the kind of health I'm talking about, they don't have. Their systems are full of all kinds of poisons and hormone disruptors and excitotoxins in their brain and toxic metals from things that have been done to them, and are all running around sabotaging ourselves. And it's much easier to be misled and controlled if you don't fix your health, and you don't wait to be diagnosed with a disease. You fix it right where you are now. And if you're really wise, you do it before you get really old, like some of us, which I didn't do. I did everything the wrong way as long as possible. but you know, I eventually learned about this stuff. And so if you understand how that works, would just ask yourself if the rulers, the network of mafias that basically control the world right now, would they want you to stay healthy or really sick all the time to be easier controlled? And it's to their great advantage for us to stay as sick as possible, which becomes pretty obvious. And getting us to do things to ourselves that are self-destructive is supported by the modern educational system, the fake educational system, all the way from preschool, where they're fed junk food in most of the schools, up through medical school and PhD school, and where they're teaching crazy stuff. And I can tell you that from firsthand experience. We're being taught to believe that poisons and invasive procedures create health, and if you're sick, you just didn't get them enough or soon enough, and you need more. And we're just being indoctrinated to let all that stuff destroy us. We're almost out of time here. So I'd say modern education is really totally successful because common sense is almost totally eliminated. But it's really just dormant. It's not dead. You can get it back, and it's very, very valuable. Even though it's derided as being unscientific, it's super valuable for your life. So I recommend getting it back. We can start to have some sanity again and realize that poisons of any kind don't produce health. They do the opposite, and it's the same. That'll let you understand agriculture if you're a farmer, or you know farmers, that they're taught by the same educational system to poison the soil, and that's feeding the world, and it's completely different from the reality. And the bottom line is there's a direct connection between real health of the body and mind and breaking out of the brainwashing. And I would suggest that we try to do that, because otherwise the agenda of the rulers is not going to a good place. Everything could change with the common sense coming back. I'm skipping over most of this because I want to finish in the next 2 minutes. And get your common sense, and you'll understand about drug medicine. If you're a doctor already in the system, you'll start waking up to what you could be doing that doesn't have any of what they call side effects, and it works much better. So be brave and learn about it, and realize you memorized a lot of stuff that may not be true. Same for the chemical farmers. I don't have time for this stuff. And that would get the public to realize things like food that's grown with chemicals is not edible. The frequencies that are being used that are destructive in Wi-Fi in general, and 5G especially, are designed to cause damage, and they shouldn't be used. You want to get the Wi-Fi out of your house and office, wire everything. But mainly if we make that change and start to wake up and get our common sense back and our natural compassion for everybody else and for all life forms, we're going to use technologies and develop technologies that are really great for convenience and productivity, but they don't hurt us and they don't hurt our life support system in the world, which is not a partisan issue. It supports everybody. The forgotten normal state is so incredible. There's no way to contain and enslave it. And my suggestion is that we get it back. And the knowledge of how to do that is available. And you have all that you need to do it yourself. Or like I said, you can get the group support system and be there with us live, interactive every week through Planetary Healing Club. PlanetaryHealingClub.com is the access point. And if you have questions about it before you want to decide if it's worth it or not to join, just email me, richard@lostartsradio.com. Or I mentioned I do a few private sessions when I have time. If you're interested in that for some reason, same thing, richard@lostartsradio.com, and ask me and I'll answer as soon as I can. If you want to help us, continue this work and eventually build a school, which is one of the things that we're trying to do when the money is there, feel free to support us if you have the funds to do that. LostArtsRadio.com has a donate button. We have a Subscribestar page, subscribestar.com/LostArtsRadio. The nonprofit site that would build the school is LostArtsResearchInstitute.org, and you can see a little bit of one possible configuration of what the school might look like. Also remember that Sunday night, that's tomorrow, at the time I'm talking, is Russ Tanner from globalskywatch.com. That was a phone call that Doug and I had with Russ that we were fortunate enough to record. Turned out super interesting. So we'll share it with you tomorrow if you want to join us. And I think that's about it. So hope we covered at least part of what I had in mind to share with you. The main thing is you have a lot of power to upgrade your own life to any extent you want. You know, don't feel powerless and don't feel weak and helpless. And those are all programming and they're fake. So your real normal state is super incredible. It's beyond any drug high. It has nothing to do with aging or degenerative disease. Those are all abnormal and reversible, unnecessary. No matter what situation you're in, there are ways now that are known that you're not supposed to know about. They can reverse those things. So learn everything you can. If you want to help other people, work on yourself, because everybody will be affected, and we can still change things for the better. Sorry to run over. We're 2 minutes late, and I really appreciate the time you spent with us. Thank you. You're the main part of this program, and I appreciate that you're letting me be here with you. I hope you have a great week. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow night for the show and Planetary Healing Club meeting in half an hour. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a good week.